welcome to the MessianTics podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby.
Shalom. We're really excited about this week's podcast because we're going to talk about something that's unique to the Messianic movement and especially to Messianic synagogues, and that is the Hebrew liturgy that is part of our services. Now, some congregations will have just a little liturgy, some will have more liturgy, but it is something that's unique to our movement, to Messianic Judaism, and aligns us largely with the Jewish community in that aspect where our praise and worship might align us more with the Christian community. And so to me, it's just an exciting thing. It's part of what breathes life into our community. Sometimes people will say that I don't understand it. It's dead. It's dry. It doesn't have a whole lot of meaning to me. But to me, it's part of, if not, it's one of, if not the most powerful and inspiring and fulfilling part of our services. So we're going to talk about that, why we do liturgy, what our favorite liturgical prayers are, the history of liturgy, all those kind of things in this episode. And I hope that for those who may not be familiar with liturgy, this be insightful to you. For those that may come to a Messianic synagogue and maybe don't understand why it's there, why do they do this Hebrew stuff in an English congregation, why is this a part of it, that maybe this podcast will bring some understanding to that.
Yeah. Why is it unique for us? Because you know, Orthodox, you go to Orthodox synagogue or even a Reformed temple, and I mean, I'm assuming you know you're getting some liturgy at those. I know at an Orthodox synagogue you are. So why is it unique for us? Is it because we do the combination of liturgy and some kind of praise and worship band or team, or?
Well, I think part of the uniqueness I was talking to was concerning the body of Messiah rather than all of Judaism. Gotcha. I said it's what connects us in a large way to the rest of the Jewish world is our liturgy.
So we're the only real group that believes in Yeshua that does Hebrew liturgy from Jewish tradition.
I mean, I don't know that we're the only one, but it's primary to us. Like it's something
we're known. Okay, we're known for it
within Messianic Judaism. It's something that's, for lack of a better way of wording it, should be innate. It's not like native. Like not every congregation does liturgy. Not every congregation does the same amount of liturgy. There's a lot of variance within Messianic Judaism to that regard. But one of the things that is unique to Messianic Judaism versus the rest of the body of Messiah is the fact that it is kind of native to our worship experience in a lot of ways. I want to throw this. I'm actually in a class right now. I'm working on my MDiv through the King's University, their Messianic Jewish Studies program, and I'm in a class on Messianic Jewish spirituality with Dr. Michael Schiffman, Rabbi Dr. Michael Schiffman. And I just want to read, because what we're dealing with in the class right now is liturgy, and it's kind of the Siddur, the prayer book, and its role in that. And I want to just share a couple of things that he said in the class that I thought's really interesting, some of which I've thought of, some of which maybe I haven't thought of before, but that I think plays a lot into why liturgy is so important in a Messianic community, and that's that liturgy teaches our values to the community as a whole. Liturgy becomes a vehicle to help us as we reach out to God. Liturgy passes on our heritage to our children. Liturgy connects us through time and space with all other believers. Liturgy communicates our identity to our people. And what's really interesting about those statements, to me at least, is that not only are those statements true within the concept, the construct of Messianic Judaism in linking us to the rest of Judaism, and in a lot of ways there are some prayers that are said very regularly in the Siddur that have been attested to having been written by disciples of Yeshua. Like Peter wrote a few prayers that are in the Siddur, included in the Siddur. There are some that I think are attested to Jacob, to James, the brother of Yeshua, etc. But what I think is really interesting is not only is liturgy a part of Messianic Jewish expression and it's tied to its Jewish heritage, but liturgy is something that has been adopted by your more Orthodox-leaning traditional churches. Your high churches and such use liturgy on a regular basis. It's maybe not the same as what we use in Judaism, but that concept of adapting liturgy, the liturgical construct, into the services there. And so it's interesting that there's, I think, those things that we take away or that we learn from liturgy, I think, equate over to your high church structured liturgical services as well, and that it ties to their heritage and so on. So there is kind of a bridging that goes into that to some degree, I think, between Messianic Judaism and the rest of the body. Like, there's a connecting tissue there in the liturgical approach. And granted, I would say probably the overwhelming majority of churches in the West are not liturgical by any means. For a lot of churches that I've had experience with and interacted with, it's 3 songs, 4 songs, announcements, a sermon, and out the door to go catch the buffet or catch whatever restaurant's open or whatever, and it's get out as quick as you can. And in some cases, it's get out as quick as you can because in 15 minutes there's another herd coming in for their service. So it's not, in our services in Messianic Judaism, for the most part, I think they tend to be a little longer than maybe what the rest of the body is accustomed to. Yeah. And in our services particularly, because we do everything in Hebrew and repeat it in English, so we actually know what we're saying, and the congregation knows what they're saying when they're participating, we could cut our services probably down by at least a third if we hacked all the English out and just did it all in Hebrew. But
yeah, I think it's funny because the only other churches that really are is liturgical. And again, not all Messianic synagogues are very liturgical, but the ones that are a little more conservative in regards to doing liturgy, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, East Orthodox tend to be very liturgical. I know the Reform crowd has tried in certain aspects to go in more of that direction, sort of having more of an orderly service, but they're still not quite as liturgical as some of the other high churches, and that I think just for Protestantism all around, that tends to be the norm. But it's funny because we have people who visit from all over, and actually we've had a couple people who come from Catholic backgrounds here, and they're like, oh, in ways is very Catholic, because there is sort of that. This is a place of worship. You've entered into a place of sacredness, where the sounds and everything around you, the clothing, like a lot of the men wear, head covering, a tallit. You'll have someone's leading particular prayers, which tend to be straight out of Scripture in a lot of cases, and there's bowing and there's movement and there's it's funny because there's a lot of people who come from Protestant backgrounds who sometimes the hardest part for them to get into is the liturgy. Sometimes that's just an absolute wall for them, and it takes months and years sometimes for people to get into that. But for people who come from a more of a high church background, sometimes that's like, oh yeah, this is you worship God with a highness. You worship God with understanding that He is He is above all, and their worship shouldn't just be a rock concert, and it shouldn't just be an emotive musical experience. But there's something about the words you say and the melody in which you say them that constitutes as praise. So, just an observation.
Well, I know that there is, this is Rabbi Toby, by the way. I know there's something to the liturgy because the first time I went to a Messianic synagogue, which was, it was really a life-changing moment for me. I was called immediately to Messianic Judaism, the first Shabbat I ever attended one. And this is back in 2005 in Macon. And one of the things that resonated with my soul was the liturgy. There was other things too, but the liturgy was definitely one of them. First, it was the language. It was Hebrew. So there is this importance with just the Hebrew language in that it connects you to Judaism, and which is the root of our faith. And so it was hearing the Hebrew, and I was so enamored with it that. I took a Siddur home, I think like a week or two later, because I told my dad about it. He had been to the synagogue before and told me about it. He was the one that introduced me to what Messianic Judaism was and told me about this place in Macon that I went to. And he said, and I told him I can't get enough of this stuff. And he goes, well, just, sneak a Siddur home, one of those purple books. So I did. And I would literally go in my room and, we all have those moments of spiritual awakening, with the Lord. I'm not talking about spiritual awakening like just anybody can have a spiritual awakening because everything's so spiritual. But
during yoga,
when God encounters you, when you intersect with, when God decides to intersect with you, and you almost have this collision with Him, and it's really earth shaking, right? So I would go because I don't really do this anymore. I'm just being honest, not because I've taken God for granted, but I would go in my room and have everything turned off, and I would just sit on the floor and read that Siddur and try to say it. And the more I attended, the more I learned. And then, of course, being someone who was a worship leader, I'm an assistant rabbi now, but I was a worship leader, and I was a cantor at now at 3 congregations. So I've had a lot of experience, but it was I can't explain, I can't put it all into words, but what I do think it is yes, it connects us to Judaism and the Hebrew language, which is very important. And I think that also my kids sing the liturgy. And the reason why is because, and they don't sing the worship songs, not that the worship songs aren't important, and they are, but what I'm saying is that what the liturgy does for me in a service is it creates this commonality from week to week and connection, which is why I think my kids can sing Matovu and the Elenu and the Vaihi and all these things because they hear that every single week, whereas my wife, who's the worship leader, she has a different worship set each week. And everything works, everything works for a purpose in a service. Worship does, but liturgy is set apart, like everything else is, but it has its own. And I think one of the things that it does is it creates this commonality each week. And I think for me, though, if somebody said what was the most important thing about liturgy, I would say, well, definitely you're prophesying every week. Yeah. You see, and I try to take them, and it's I've had a couple of moments where I've been able to share with the congregation, as the Lord has led, because every week we say, for instance, the V'nei Amar. We say the V'nei Amar every week after the Elenu, right? Which V'nei Amar B'haya Adonai, and it's from Zechariah. It says, and in that day the Lord shall be king over all the world. On that day the Lord will be one in His name one. I just felt like the Lord told me there are people that don't know what that means. Yeah. I said, what it means is you're saying every week that there will come a day when God's going to rule the world, and anybody who knows anything about any kind of God is going to know it's the God of Israel. He's going to be the only name that people associate with a king and a ruler and a God. Yeah. And even the Vaihi, from Zion will go forth the Torah. That's not just saying, oh yeah, the Torah went forth from Zion, back in the Bible. No, it's saying that when Yeshua returns, the Torah is going to go forth from Zion again. You're saying that. Yeah. So it's really powerful, and it's so important. Not just so you can learn some Hebrew and do some Jewish stuff, which I know. And if that's what if that's what it is for you, you're missing it. Yeah. It's so important. So.
Yeah, and then there are some who do accuse Messianic Judaism as sort of play acting Judaism, and there are, and I'm not saying there aren't congregations that do kind of look more like they're just play acting because the liturgy isn't important. It's something that you kind of breeze through, and maybe you're saying the Shema with something else. Right. Maybe you're just saying the Shema, or maybe you're not doing it, or maybe you're saying liturgical prayers. That are a little more made to contemporary music, so there's not even a place of reverence made for those. You don't set aside the normative contemporary stuff. Not that the contemporary stuff is bad, but you're not setting that aside, so that space and that place of sound and speaking is devoted specifically to speaking that portion to God.
And that brings us to an interesting tie-in here, and that's that we're currently working through a series on MessianTics on dealing with kind of the fellowship model of congregational organizational life and more of a formal structured denominational kind of approach and the benefits of both and perhaps the holdups or headaches or hassles of both and what we feel like, and the four of us, I'm not saying like everybody in Messianic Judaism has to be in agreement with this, but the four of us, these are us. This is us conversing and processing through, not saying we have all the answers, but conversing and processing through what we think could better the Messianic movement in its longevity, rather than just kind of fly by the night, seat of our pants kind of a situation, and actually plan for, prep for, and be ready for a future. And I think this conversation on liturgy very much fits into that discussion, because there is not a substantial amount of legitimate cantoral training in the Messianic Jewish movement. There is some, like Dr. Greg Silverman does some cantoral coaching and things like that. I know that I believe Shuvu has some sort of cantoral training that they do. The UMJC now, over the last couple of years, have developed some courses on cantoral training, which is phenomenal.
What's the school in St. Petersburg? The
Netzer David.
They have cantoral training.
So there's some out there, but most of those are sporadic and scattered. But this idea of fellowship versus, the kind of denominational structure or formal structure, fellowship allows for everybody just to come to the table and do what they're doing. And there's, again, like we've talked, there's not really accountability. And Rabbi Jonathan brought up the fact that there are those on the outside of Messianic Judaism, particularly from the traditional Jewish world, that will say that we're just playing Jews. We're just pretending to be Jews. We're really just Christians trying to put on a Jewish show to lure Jews to leave Judaism and become Christians, which is not the case. And there are those in the church that will say, well, you're not really believers. You're just playing a believer while you're really just Jews and Judaizers and legalistic and whatever. But the liturgy is so beautiful. It's so powerful. We know, for instance, the majority of the Shemone Ezra, the 18 benedictions, or also known as the Amidah, the standing prayer. The majority of what we know as the Amidah, the Shemone Ezra, dates back pre-Yeshua. Not all of it, but the majority of it dates back pre-Yeshua. When you look at what's often called the Lord's Prayer from Matthew 6, in comparing it to the Amidah, thematically they run hand in hand. You look at it with the Kaddish, and it runs hand in hand. It wasn't Yeshua preparing a new liturgical piece. He was giving us a model for prayer based off of what was already modeled in Judaism.
Yeah. Well, and even later on, sorry.
No, you're good.
Go ahead. So I was saying that even later on, with as Gentiles begin flooding in, who are not used to liturgy, and we can talk a little more later about how to fold people into more liturgy or less liturgy, whatever. But like things like the Greek document, the Didache, like incorporates the Lord's Prayer, which is given as a pattern, but it actually, like we see within the first century, that was taken and made an actual liturgical piece for people who were coming out of idolatry and had no idea what Jewish prayer looked like.
Yeah. And what I think is important is if we move away from the fellowship model, where there's not just, there's no accountability, there's no framework, there's no structure, there's no, like, I'm cautious when people in my congregation say, hey, Rabbi, I'm traveling to such and such. Would you recommend a congregation? I'm like, all right, well, let me go check what congregations that are connected to the organizations we're connected to are near there. Okay, now let me go see who their rabbi is to see if I know them. Let me go look at their service real quick to see how it, because I'm not just going to go, hey, you should go here, you should go there, because there are some places. Like somebody in our congregation recently traveled somewhere or were traveling somewhere, and they were looking for a congregation to set up to go to on Shabbat. And so I recommended one that I know the rabbi of, at least peripherally, like we're not super close, but I know him, and he's part of the same organization, or one of the organizations that we're a part of. And so I said, hey, check out this congregation. They look at the website, they reach out to him, and they got a response that was, I'm not sure if it was definitively worded this way or if it was kind of
the spirit of it
conferred in the spirit of the, but like in essence they said, well, are you Jewish, because we really only want Jewish people here, is kind of the way that she read it, because she comes to our congregation where that's not our attitude at all. And so she was a little put off, and I said, well, I don't know like what their stance is on that. I'm not really sure. I said, but reach back out to them and say, let them know you go to a Messianic congregation, that you're a member of a Messianic congregation, and let them know who your rabbi is. And so she gets back to me and she goes, oh, they said that we're absolutely welcome. I'm excited. I'm going to get to go check it out. But, all of a sudden it's like, wait, now there's an issue there I didn't even think would be an issue there, that I've got to now think that through and whatever. Yeah. But one of the beauties of not having, of not just being a fellowship, is we can have some sort of structure where we can teach the value of liturgy. Like, we can train up, we've talked about training up rabbis, we can train up chazanim, we can train up cantors to lead congregations, we can train up people, teaching them about the beauty of what the prayers mean, where they come from, what the intention is, how the liturgy is structured in the Siddur in each of the services, what should be done or shouldn't be done on Shabbat. For instance, we always talk about, or at least I do in our congregation, I talk regularly about the fact that most of the Messianic congregations I've ever been a part of, if they do any of the Amidah, it's typically only the first 3 verses, or the first 2 and a excerpt from the 3, which is the third, which is what we do. We'll do the Avot, the Gebar Danai, and then an excerpt from Kedusha, and we don't do the rest of it. But what I also rarely ever talk about is that, traditionally speaking, on Shabbat in synagogue, you would not do the middle 8 verses, 8 benedictions, because it's typical within Judaism, especially Orthodox Judaism, that you don't ask for things from God. Yeah. You don't petition God on Shabbat. So you would do the first 3 and you do the last 3, but you don't do the middle, right? And we don't think about that, and we don't really talk about it much in Messianic Judaism, but there's a reason why in Messianic synagogues it's typically the first 3 verses that are done, the first 3 benedictions that are done. Now, for me, I think it's really awesome that we do those 3, because I also see the link to the Besorah, to the good news, the gospel of Yeshua, with the promised Redeemer in the Avot and the promise of resurrection, the Gebar Danai, and then us joining with the angels and the saints in proclaiming the Kedusha around the throne for all eternity. So we see the beauty of the gospel message in those prayers, and we're tying ourselves not only to the historical heritage of our people, but also to the root of the Messianic expectation within Judaism, and as Messianic believers, our hope and expectation for when the Jewish world will come to faith in Yeshua. But being able to teach that and train that into a future cantoral army, if you would be awesome. As organizationally, being able to build that up, but also being able to teach. Like, we talk all the time about the Ashkenazi tradition and the Sephardi tradition, but they really don't exist quite as, for lack of using not being able to use a term that's not like culturally sensitive right now. Ashkenazi, Sephardi tradition, and Judaism tradition is not binary, right? You can't just say the Ashkenazi or just the Sephardi, because you have Ashkenazi, you have Sephardi, you have Yemenite, you have a few others mixed in, Mizrahi that's mixed in there. But then also on top of that, it's not that you sing an Ashkenazi melody to a prayer. It's typically that you sing whatever melody your chazan did when you were growing up. Because in yeshiva, they typically will teach you a great chazan writes their own melody to the prayers, right? So you may know the same prayers and use the same words, but you have an entirely different. Our congregation does some of our liturgy entirely different than you guys do here at Bradam. And I grew up with Rabbi Eric as my rabbi, and yet I still do some of the liturgy different. Our people will go to other conferences or other congregations, and the liturgy is done entirely different than they're used to with us. But we can begin to teach, hey, there is a fluidity available in the way we approach the liturgy, so long as that fluidity is done. In Hebrew, and we just talked about this in this class that I'm in also, but in Judaism, you have 2 concepts. You have the kavah and the kavanah. The kavah is the structure. It's the way that it's traditionally held. These are the things that has to be done, right? And you can follow the kavah, but you also need the kavanah. The kavanah. The kavanah is the intention of the heart. What is the intention? And it's in the kavanah that we can allow the ruach to move. So we can stick to the keva and still have the kavanah. We can have the 2 work together. They don't have to be intention.
Right, and as we do this, and going back to the understanding of the fellowship versus the denominational thing, what's important isn't so much the melody, because the melody can change, but the Hebrew should be correct.
Yes.
The Hebrew should be pronounced right in that. And one of the things I'd like to see that would unify is, if you go to an Orthodox synagogue, there's an Orthodox Siddur in your pew. If you go to a conservative synagogue, there's a conservative siddur. So if I go from one conservative synagogue to another that's in the same organization, they're going to be using the same siddur. So when I travel from one city to another, I can open up the siddur, and there's a comfort level to the structure, to the look, to the feel of the book, to where the thing is on pages and all that. Yeah. In Messianic Judaism, we don't have a real siddur that's for an organization, for a group. There's different ones. John Fisher has one, and there's the Greenberg siddur, and there's others, but there's not a siddur that is the common book between the congregations. I would love to see that, if only so that when someone comes visiting, you're in a different place. You're already a little uncomfortable because you're in a strange location, but now you look at the chair and you see a book that has a connection with the rest of Judaism. Also, one of the things that people have, especially friends of mine who come from a Christian background, will say, I don't like the liturgy because it's just repeating. It's vain repetition. It's saying the same words over and over. And I always respond to them, have you sang Good, Good Father? Or How Great Is Our God? Or Oceans, or many of the popular choruses and songs that are sung in Christianity today are repetitive. The words, and you sing that song. I cannot tell you. I mean, my wife and I went to a church that we had been at like 30 years ago, and we walked in the door and they started the service, and they were singing the same song, worship songs that they sang 30 years ago. So it's not that Hebrew liturgy is fundamentally different, but for some reason we look at it that way. And part of that is, I think we lose the value. Rabbi Toby began with his talking about this, the connectivity to Israel, to the root, to what we are. The liturgy does two different things in our services that connect us to ancient ways. One is the order of the liturgy in a traditional siddur is done in the order of the temple worship and temple service. So you have the morning prayers, you have the afternoon prayers, and you have the evening prayers that coordinate with what was happening at the temple between the preparation for the offerings being made, and then the after offerings processed, and then leading to the next offering, and so on, going through. The other thing is that the order that our services, and this is one of the things I really love about a Messianic service, is that our services are also in the structure of the temple or the tabernacle. In other words, when we enter into the gates with thanksgiving, there's a portion of the service that is just the courtyard portion of the service. And then we go to our liturgical part of the service, which is like entering into the holy place. It's speaking a holy language and speaking ancient prayers that connect us with our ancient people, and who all the way to Sinai and back to that. And then we enter into the holiest of holies, the Holy of Holies, when we do our Torah service and we actually break the bread, and we enter into that special place where we commune with God, where God speaks to us from His Word. So part of the structure and format of a Messianic service is that we go through from the outer court to the inner, to the holy place, to the Holy of Holies. And in doing so, it follows this process that, again, connects us to the ancient form of worship of our people, whether Jewish or non-Jewish. Because remember, when the people gathered at the tabernacle, there were people that were Israel, descendants of Jacob, and the mixed multitude that were there, the non-Jewish people who had become grafted in and part of Israel. So all of this is part of the cumulative of what we do with worship. So worship is not, liturgical worship is not that different in some ways from English worship, because we have songs that we sing that repeat verses or repeat choruses, or songs that we sing every week for, I can't tell you how many times I've been to a church where Oceans was sung, or where Our Good, Good Father was sung, or whatever, week after week after week, because they're beautiful songs. And I'm not speaking against doing that, but just understand we have to be honest about what we're doing. And just because we repeat Matovu every week doesn't mean it's different than repeating our Good, Good Father every week for weeks on end.
And what's the difference in the attitude between the Siddur and a hymnal?
Yeah,
where it's literally the same 300 songs that are rotated through every single week for cycle. Years on end.
Yeah, if you're on a super traditional, like primitive Baptist or churches, they're pretty They're pretty strict about. They haven't. There is an annual like flow of which songs are used.
They have no connection to hymnals or hymns in general. So,
well, it's
other
just.
than I know they exist.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, there's some depending on what kind of tradition you're from when it comes to Baptist or especially older, more rural churches, like the altar call. There's like 4 songs that are always used for an altar call, and because I only ever heard like 4 or 5, when I growing up.
And one thing that's unique about our congregation, and I'm not saying unique good or unique bad, but unique based upon my experience, is that there are liturgical prayers that we do every week. We do the Shema and Vahavta every week. We do the Matovu and we do Veshamru every week. There's others that we do every week, but there's some liturgical prayers we don't do every week that we kind of rotate depending on who's doing the liturgy, who our chazan is for that week. And that's because growing up in synagogue, I had memorized the prayers and could recite the prayers through by memory without them having meaning, without them having a kavanah. It was just, and to me, the Kaddish, which is said 4 or 5 times, depending on where you're going, it was like, okay, the first Kaddish is done, I'm done with the first quarter. Second Kaddish is done, okay, it's halftime. Third Kaddish is done, okay, the third quarter is over, we're coming to the end of the service. Fourth Kaddish, okay, the game is over. It was not a matter of those Kaddishes having real meaning, which they do have if you have the right kivanah and the right spirit, but I didn't want it to become repetition that was vain. I wanted each person to not only know what they're saying, which is why we do the English, but for them to be a unique experience where they're brought into that song when it's sung, and so it's not just habit and okay, if I just get through this, I can get to the dinner. In that way.
Because if you really read the prayers and if you're following along, they're really not vain or repetitive. I mean, they're really not repetitious at all. When we sing them, we might come back and do a verse or a stanza within the reading that might be a repeat. But they themselves usually are just passages from Scripture or the Psalms or Proverbs that are like it would like if you were to read it without a melody, it would be as if you just cracked open a Bible and read a passage.
Now, Toby is really the only one of the 4 of us that actually served singularly as a cantor as part of, Rabbi David and I and Rabbi Jonathan all done liturgy, but largely that was by necessity to fill in when there wasn't somebody to do that. So, Rabbi Toby, as someone who served as a cantor in that role, what was most meaningful, and also maybe what was your favorite liturgical prayer to lead?
I think what was always meaningful was the times that my wife and I would put something original behind some liturgy, not changing it. I'm talking about like there's a few that we've done. Some we've never played publicly outside of like the congregation we were at the time. Some we have. We've incorporated some liturgy into songs too. We wrote a worship song called "Kingdom Come" and we put the Ben Amoir in it. And we helped write another song with a few people called "Renew Our Days," and that has the Etz Chaim in it, which Tree of Life, And I think the most meaningful is when it becomes such a part of you and ingrained in your heart, and you love it so much that you get creative with it outside of traditionally what it was. Or what it is, so that. So those are the most meaningful times. We arranged a version of the Vayehi, which is sung during the Torah service, Vayehi ben Saharon, and we played that. And we actually did that last summer at the UMJC conference, and it was really well received. Actually, a couple congregations came up and said, "We really want to play that. Where'd you get it?" And we're like, "Oh, well, my wife and I arranged that," and it was very humbling. It's the greatest compliment as a musician when someone wants to play your stuff. I don't care how, I don't care about like more than somebody wanting to buy a CD that I've recorded is when someone wants to. Like I remember, hearing someone else play a song that my wife and I had arranged, but we did that to the Vayehi, and that was very meaningful. Like I said, the most meaningful is when it becomes kind of your own thing. When you take something and creatively put your own music to it and thing like that as a cantor or as a worship leader. My favorite piece of liturgy is, there's two of them. It's the Aleinu, and it's because it's such a high, it's a high song of praise to God. It just talks about just how awesome God is.
Yeah.
And yet he set us apart, right, as his people. And it has the V'namar at the end, which is very prophetic, very powerful. Just basically says, look, one day God is going to be everybody, like, whether, and what I tell people is, whether they like God or not, the most atheist, agnostic, atheist, God-hating person, there's going to come a day when they're going to go, he's God.
Yeah.
There he is. And I love the Vayhi also because it's prophetic, and because I love the Torah service so much. So I do love the Vayhi Ben Saul Haron, and I've put my wife and I've done arrangements of both the Aleinu and the Vayhi. So because they're very meaningful to us,
Yeah.
But yeah, again, just to sum up what I said, I think as being a cantor, and I've in 3 congregations, the most meaningful is the times like I've loved a piece of liturgy so much that I put my own arrangement to it. And like I said, my favorites are the Aleinu and the Vayhi.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What is a cantor? I feel like we should. We haven't defined that the entire episode so far.
It's the person who leads liturgy. Yeah. The person who leads the liturgy. Yeah.
Yeah, and they also, they're trained vocally a lot of the times, especially in a normative traditional.
I was never formally trained.
You were just that good.
No, I just learned the prayers, and then one week the worship leader went out of town, and my rabbi at the time, we were in Macon, Georgia, and my rabbi at the time said, "Hey, worship leader's going out of town. I heard you know the liturgy. Do you mind leading it?" And I was like, yeah, sure, And I did it, and it went really well.
Yeah.
At least the feedback I got was really well. And then when that worship leader moved on, and I became the worship leader, well, then I also became the cantor, and then I was kind of in the deep end of the pool. God just kind of threw me in the deep end of the pool with that. And sometimes he does that. And so no formal training. And that's the thing. Just I want to throw my 2 cents on training cantors. I think that it is very important, and I think that we should do it. I just don't think we should formalize it too much to the point to where it's like, it needs to, people need to feel like, everybody needs to feel like they have access to learn that if they have a passion for it, and not like,
Yeah. But there's some people that are obviously better than others. And that's not to put anyone down. It's just, but like, for example, like, I was listening to a guy singing the other day on I think it was like America's Got Talent or something. And there are just some people who are clearly better, and then you listen to like people who like train in opera, like operatic singers who, and they're like, and like since they were 8, they were in a class or school being trained. Like, oh my goodness, their voices are powerful. Like and those are voices like you can be great naturally. But you can be almost perfect with that extra training.
Yeah, like I know my limitations.
Yeah,
like, for instance, I could probably learn the choral version of Kol Nidre, but I've heard people do it, and I've heard people do it like, good God, like concert level, and I think that's incredible. And when we had a Kol Nidre service a few years back, and this is before we were at Mayim Chaim, we were in Macon, and I was like, and Brooke's like, this is a choral piece. Like, I don't know if we should give this a shot. And I told Brooke, I said, well, maybe pray and sit at the piano and see what you can come up with. Because my wife is a better songwriter than me. I said that openly and privately, but and she wrote a really beautiful Kol Nidre arrangement, which I know one other congregation that I know of used. Because it's like, and that I don't have that voice. Like, I know my limitations, so I'm like, I'm not going to touch that. But again, a meaningful moment is when you can come up with your own arrangement for something. But yeah, the Kol Nidre, that's what you sing on the eve of Yom Kippur. By the way.
So I do want to clarify one thing when we have this conversation, or while we're continuing this conversation on fellowship and formal structure, to Rabbi Toby's point, like when we're talking about formally developing a Chazan training program. Like, I'm not talking like we said last session when we talked about this, dealing with like raising up rabbis and training rabbis. Like, it shouldn't have to be a master's degree level education, right? There should be education. There should be training. Like, there are things you should know, right? And that's what we're getting at. I think at least what I'm suggesting with the liturgy is there are things that people should know about the liturgy, like the intent, the history behind some of the prayers, where they come from, what their purpose is, what they mean, that you're not necessarily going to, a lot of people aren't going to take the initiative to open up a book like Jewish Worship by Milgram, or to go and dig out a book that deals with the history of the liturgy and where it comes from and what traditions hold to this prayer or that prayer and where it's done in a service and why and so on. And so, yeah, like, you can come along and learn the liturgy and figure out how to sing it, and you can get up and lead it, and worship with it. But there's something to the need for our movement 40 plus years into this to actually be able to lay a foundation of where those people that are being raised up are able to say, okay, look, I know, here's this baseline information. I know this. I know why we do this here. I know what this is about. I know what this prayer means. The correct pronunciation of the Hebrew words, etc. Not a like strict formal thing where it's like there needs to be access. Those that have a heart for it, that preferably can somewhat carry a tune. Like, you can look through videos on YouTube of synagogues all over the world, and you're going to notice that there are some cantors that have absolutely phenomenal voices, and there's some cantors, they don't necessarily have the greatest voice, but they're fine. Like, they're not like making you want to vomit. Yeah, like they do fine, and you can sing with them and worship with them, and that's all great. Like, I'm not saying there should be a limitation on who's got access to it.
Yeah.
Or that, and it definitely doesn't need to be super expensive by any means. But it needs to be something where there's some sort of kind of baseline education, so that when people are leading, they know what they're talking about. This is something Rabbi Toby and I developed for our congregation, kind of out of necessity more than anything, was just a very simple liturgy course for people that are interested in becoming part of our Chazanim team at CMC. Is we developed a course. It's only we right now it's only 4 weeks, but we developed a course based just off of what we do in our service on a regular basis, and went through kind of some of the history and the purpose and the meaning, the scriptural connections, the scriptural connective tissue between the liturgy and the particular prayer that we're dealing with, and where it's found in Scripture, or where the concept is found in Scripture, why it's said in that part of the service, or if we do it, which there are some things that we do out of its normal place in the traditional Siddur, why do we do it there? Like, if you're going to do that, you need to have a reason. You need to have an understanding of why it's there. Like, what is its purpose in that place in your service? Mm-hmm. And so we went through all of this and laid it all out. And now I think we ran 3 people through that, 2 people officially through that class so far.
2.
And I think there will be more over the coming year or two. But we've ran 2 people through that. So we literally doubled our cantoral team. Just and it was very accessible. We announced, if you're interested and you're a member and you want to do this, it wasn't like, it wasn't anything that pushed anybody away, but it was solely for the purpose of planting that foundation, because you need, like we said, you need the kavanah with the keva, but you also need the keva with the kavanah. You need to know the why with the...
And then one last thing I wanted to say about cantoring and liturgy, and that is that there's no reason a woman, and the only reason I'm saying this because Rabbi David says chazanim several times, which is the masculine ending to the word. However, when you speak about a group of people, you use the masculine word for the entire group. So women can be cantors or chazanot in the same way. And so, matter of fact, a funny story, when we were first starting Bradam, we had 3 people that were rotating doing the cantoring. And one of them was a female, and one of the congregants came up to me and said, I just want you to know I'm really uncomfortable having a female cantor. And I said, well, can you give me a biblical reason why you're uncomfortable? Can you point in the scriptures to something that says that a woman can't lead worship and lead in the liturgy? And they said, no. I said, well, in that case, every third week you're going to be uncomfortable until you get comfortable with the fact that a woman is going to be leading the liturgy. At our synagogue, we have both men and women that lead the liturgy, same as I believe at Rabbi David's, because there's no biblical prohibition to that. And there are enough things in the Bible that are prohibitions that we shouldn't add to that list with our own personal things. So I just wanted to say that. So if you're out there and you're a male or a female and you want to lead liturgy, it's something that both can be a part of in leading a community in worship. And some of the most beautiful liturgy I've ever heard was done, sung by female cantors.
Yeah. In regards to access, some have done a really good job about, I haven't looked at all the different programs I know that are out there, but I know Me'ochad wasn't that expensive, and it was pretty accessible. When, because I looked at it years ago before it went away.
Right.
Back in, I think 19 was the last year that it was done. December.
COVID kind of effectively did away. We were going to do one more conference, and
gotcha.
Well, COVID came after that, but honestly, it was the Lord that the conference didn't work out that last one.
Yeah, because I was actually. It's funny because I was actually. I joke with my wife about it because I could have met. Had it happened, it's possible that I would have met her there because I was the congregation I was at the time. I was helping more and more with liturgy, and they were like, "Hey, we could help you, pay for you to go to the cantoral part of this, and you can go and learn and bring back what you learn here." And
we wanted to get more into liturgy. I know towards the end of because Brooke and I, we left Me'ochad when the Lord called us here, because we wanted to devote all of our time to rabbinic ministry and what we were doing here. And the Lord said it's time. We put 5 years into Me'ochad. And I know the ministry director, Mark Vidito, I know towards the end he released an album, and it was under a Me'ochad label, and it was all the Yom Kippur prayers, so it was very liturgical. But other than that, most of our focus was on worship. But we had a few liturgy songs, like in the songbook and stuff. I think but we tried to go that liturgy route, And then Brooke and I, of course, we left, and I don't know. I think Mark is now focusing on his work with the TLV, the Tree of Life stuff, and also, of course, he's very involved in his home congregation. So I don't think Me'ochad is active.
Yeah.
But it was, the most important thing was that songbook where people could download chord sheets. But it was mostly worship. It was like 90%.
Okay.
Like praise and worship. But with the exception of that Atonement CD, which was, cantoral. And then there was the few of things that me and Brooke put up. Yeah.
I think it was, I guess my point was that it was accessible. It wasn't that expensive. And
no.
I think we would all like to see is instead of everyone developing their own wheel of different diameters to carry this train along, it would be better to see the Messianic movement pull together to where you could have, kind of like at the regional conferences where you have a yeshiva class, where you could actually have voice trainers and cantors, actually give classes to people who are either aspiring to be or already are, just to learn some new things, sort of continuing education.
Right.
It's got a focal point, so it happens once a year, twice a year at a specific place, and congregations and communities and regions can pay to have people go and be a part of and learn, and then we're kind of all on the same page. And then even if you go back to your congregation and you decide to use less liturgy or more liturgy just to tailor to your wherever you are, there's still a baseline of here's how to use the whole Siddur,
right,
and do with that what you will.
Right, and just for the listener to know, if you're unfamiliar with liturgy, if you go to shalompensacola.com, on there's videos of the liturgy we do at our synagogue with, follow the bouncing ball type. So you can listen to what Hebrew liturgy sounds like and follow along with transliterated words on that, just to get a taste of what it is if you're not familiar. And if you want to learn the prayers, they're there, and it's available for free for anybody who wants to just touch base with that. Liturgy is such a powerful part of our expression of our faith, and I hope that this episode has enlightened you a little, maybe made you a little interested, maybe incited within you a desire to search out more, and maybe if you had an aversion to liturgy, maybe this helped you to understand what its purpose is, and maybe will help you to learn to love it as we do.
Thank you for listening to the MessianTics podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at MessianTics Podcast.